Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, culture, business, news, you name it. If it impacts you, we discuss it. Today, we're going to have another interview with Lee Henderson, who is running for Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors, Place 3. This is a new seat and something we should be aware about, as that election is May 4th. Lee's a close friend to Ann and I's, and so sitting with him, being able to banter about his work and how he sees Fort Worth is always fun. Ann, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I think we're going to have a bevy of guests all at once, which in the past we've talked a little bit about trying to spice it up and not have it just be you and I, but sometimes have a guest maybe at a minimum once a month. And because I think of elections, we ended up with guest all in a row. So hopefully people enjoy that. Yeah,
we're going to have a guest next time and possibly the next time. And so, it's going to be not a lot of me and you for a little bit, but that's okay. And I know a lot of you enjoyed the Kathleen Hicks interview. If you haven't listened to it, go ahead and listen to it, especially if you're Precinct 1, because you're going against Roderick Miles and Kathleen Hicks for the runoff. That election is May 28th.
So we need everybody to remember that there are two elections in May and that they should be participating in both of them.
Yes. And so what we're going to dive into, also before we dive into it, what was really interesting, and I'm only bringing this up because it seems like a lot of people don't know about it, and I didn't really see a story about it, but the person in third of that Precinct 1 commissioner seat, Mia Hall, endorsed Kathleen Hicks. That's an interesting, I think, win for Kathleen Hicks, simply because she was 2 percentage points above Roderick when they had the primary. Mia got 25%, so that's a big lift. And I also think, just the endorsement of a woman backing the other woman. I think this really, currently the landscape gives to me Kathleen Hicks a little bit of an edge. So we'll see what happens and where it goes from there. Awesome. So what we're going to also talk about is something that we know that at the state level, a lot of bills have been passed or being challenged. And one of those is Senate Bill 4. It was passed and signed into law November 2023, and it was scheduled to go into effect earlier this month. The challenges from the Biden administration and a stay by the United States Supreme Court have pushed off its implementation. Critics of the law have argued it violates the federal government's constitutional authority to enforce immigration law. They compared it to a 2010 law in Arizona that grants federal immigration enforcement authorities to local law enforcement. So really the kicker here is, right, we've seen a bill like this before in Texas's history.
And it had the same number, which is why I'm triggered every time I hear them talking about this, because when I was on council, there was a Senate Bill 4 that was dubbed the Show Me Your Papers law. And we had similar declarations from local police saying that this was not their area of purview and that they were not going to be focused on immigration enforcement because that's not what local police do. And that the concern back then, and I think the concern today, is that when you have these kind of laws, that it discourages people from calling the police when they need help. And our law enforcement folks want people to call them when they need assistance.
Yeah, and so that's, to me, like why this, as a short story, sometimes Fort Worth acts like a big city who is not afraid of the state officials. You see that a lot in Houston. You see that a lot with Dallas. And so I think this is great that Chief Noakes is saying, hey, even though that they're trying to give our departments the power to enforce immigration law, we're not going to change the mission of our department. The quote is, in light of vibrant growth of our city and diversity of our communities, our department remains unwavering in its commitment to community policing and making Fort Worth the safest city in the country for all who call this community home. So to me, I think we wanted to share this kind of with you guys, is that I know we're seeing a lot of that state politics. Immigration is going to be the big thing through all the way through November, just because there's really not a lot other things Republicans can hold on to. And so I think this immigration thing seems a lot bigger. You're also seeing states trying to emulate what Texas has done, which is kind of disgusting. You're seeing that with Oklahoma, Iowa. But to me, this short story is a win for Chief Noakes, just being a leader and telling us, hey, Fort Worth PD is going to stick with its mission and not get into the new bill and try to enforce that. And so I think that's
I think our sheriff has other opinions, but
what did he say?
He said that we don't know who's coming across our borders or what their intentions are, and this law is the first step in many steps needed to stop the surge of illegal entry. So he was looking forward to the Supreme Court lifting its stay so that the law can go into effect.
You remember when you and I went to that panel, one of the people who were asking a question we're talking about how he's a part of a task force or group to deal with border immigration.
The 287G is a contract that they have with the Immigration and Nationality Act that lets law enforcement workers work with federal immigration officers and perform immigration law enforcement functions. So they're one county that does do that, and they've been criticized for that over the years. There's many folks that think they shouldn't be concentrating on that. I think there's another article that I'm not sure made our list to talk about today, talking about how the county had spent $37,000 to recruit people to serve in the jails. And I think at that same panel you mentioned, the sheriff got some criticism for concentrating on things that aren't like the core purview of his job. And as long as that's not being done to the highest level, maybe he should concentrate a little bit more on those things.
The other one was the election fraud, or like being on that task force.
Right.
And, we see Fredericksburg over here.
Oh, I listened to a podcast this morning, all those by hand counting and the massive amounts of mistakes that were made in, I can't remember the name of the county, but it's Fredericksburg is the major city in that county, where they tried to count 8,000 ballots by hand. And they did it really fast, and then they were trumpeting around how well that they had succeeded because they did it within the time frame that they have to do it within, and that was a success. And now they're being audited by some outside organizations to see if those counts were actually accurate. And one of the precinct chairs said in an interview that he woke up with a feeling of dread and went back and checked some of his answers or his calculations just in his precinct and found errors. So I think they're going to find that there were quite a few errors being made.
And it looks like it's Gillespie County?
Gillespie County.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, what's cool is you have people in Gillespie County and Tarrant Bill Wayborn, who is playing to the narrative, where you have at least people like our Fort Worth Police Department leadership saying, hey, we as a city can't be doing that. And I think that those are the one things that I give hope and light to when I see our city officials act this way towards state shenanigans. So we do have some hope in the Tarrant Commissioner's office. Commissioner Simmons, Elisa Simmons. This is an article for short story number 2 discussing environmental issues. And this is, I think Haley Samsel is a great reporter who makes, things like environment interesting to read. And I think she did a great job reporting and just talking about what Elisa Simmons is doing here. So
yeah, I'm always interested in environmental reporting because I have an undergraduate degree in environment. So I find her articles interesting regardless, but I think she does do a good job of bringing it down to the level that everybody can understand it and why it's important to them. So like you said, it's a Fort Worth Report article. Tarrant County Commissioner pushes for countywide environmental change with help of committee.
So last summer, Simmons created an environmental advisory committee of community members with expertise in areas such as solar power, electric vehicles, and air quality issues. Commissioners are responsible for appointing members to boards overseeing elections, civil services, child protective services, emergency services. However, there wasn't anything around environment. And so Simmons formed her first advisory committee after hearing about the Environmental Protection Agency's Solar for All program early last year, which was established by Inflation Reduction Act. The competitive grant program will give $7 billion to states and counties across the U.S. looking to provide solar energy to low-income and disadvantaged communities. Elisa Simmons wanted more viewpoints and expertise on solar energy as she considered how Tarrant County could get involved. And so her motion to make this happen, the committee would be pivotal to Simmons' run at Tarrant County, and this coalition was important to her. And she applied for Solar for All funding, and her motion failed in July because of opposition from the Republican members of the court. Tim O'Hare raised concerns about the impact of solar panels on home sales and the potential influence on Tarrant County's decisions from other larger counties.
So I think she's put this environmental committee in place, and once it's up and running, it'll form kind of an advisory board that will have hopefully some younger folks and some folks with various areas of interest. She's also formed a criminal justice advisory board and a mental health professionals board. So I think she definitely is adding things that will be positive to the overall quality of life in Tarrant County.
Another thing you would like here is she also turned her attention to how the county can transition its vehicle fleet to electric and establish its first sustainability plan. So really, I think why this work is important is there's a lot of money flowing federally to become more sustainable and operating our energy. And we often see Dallas, when you and I read the Dallas Morning News, them winning things that it's like, why are we not winning those grants for XYZ that can make your city more green? And so this county move by Commissioner Simmons, I think, allows us to start finally getting involved in things that we should get into. And what's annoying about O'Hare's comments is like, oh, we're just being influenced by larger cities because, like, as if that's a bad thing, but it's no, because those large counties and cities are actually benefiting from things that are out there for us to not use tax dollars on.
Not use local tax dollars.
Yeah, local tax dollars on.
Yeah.
So it's just, again, I think it's a story where we just wanted to update you on something that you might not be aware of, and that is that now we have sustainability plans and a group at the county trying to prioritize it similar to other areas of the county, especially as there's...
And I do want to give a little credit to the Sierra Club, because she mentions that when she was first running for office, she got questionnaires from different groups, and she got one from the Sierra Club, and that made this of interest to her, an issue that she realized was important. And I know the Sierra Club has done those surveys in all elections for many, many years, and I think it's good to see the outcome of kind of a grassroots organization working locally to make sure that those that we elect are attacking and addressing the concerns that those organizations have.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and move into the third story, which you're going to kind of take us through 3 stories around transit. And then we'll get to Lee Henderson, who's a native Fort Worthian and full of information, as our big story.
All right. So there were 3 stories that touched on transit in the last week. And the first one is a call to action, so I'm going to go with it right off the bat. This is something that was actually put out by the city of Fort Worth. Have your say in Fort Worth's transit study. And this is a Central Texas Council of Governments is conducting a transit study of Fort Worth's 76104 zip code, and residents have a chance this month to contribute to the dialogue. So on March 25th, which is the day that you will be listening to this podcast, but hopefully early in the morning, so that you will have plenty of time to plan to go to a meeting that is scheduled for 5:45 that evening at the LMA Chambly Library, which is located at 1062 Evans Avenue, to discuss the project and give feedback to the North Central Texas Council of Governments. The 76104 transit study will assess public transportation needs in order to identify innovative solutions and increase mobility and access for residents to food, healthcare, housing, and jobs in a part of Fort Worth identified as an area of persistent poverty. The planning study will also identify strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to transit for the zip code that a UT Southwestern medical study identified as having the lowest life expectancy in Texas. So this project was made possible with a grant awarded to the North Central Texas Council of Governments to examine this, and they are coordinating with residents, nonprofit organizations, and community leaders to establish consensus and develop a plan to improve the community access to basic needs. So I would encourage everybody to go to that and give their input. There were two other stories that touched on transit. One of them is a Dallas Morning News article that talks about an express bus route, which was going to be implemented between Southeast Fort Worth, where there are quite a few people living, and Alliance to cater to folks commuting to jobs. And this will be an electric bus, and it will guarantee on-time arrival with weekday pickups every 15 minutes during peak hours, which is really great to hear because a lot of times people complain about transit and say, oh, there's nobody ever on those buses are empty. And I point out to them that when you have frequencies that are so infrequent that it makes it very inconvenient for folks, that is a really hard sell to get folks to use those options. But these sound like some pretty fancy buses, which will have Wi-Fi and will depart every 15 minutes. They'll go every 30 minutes in off-peak time, so that's still pretty good frequency because some of our bus routes are every hour. And these buses will use Interstate 30's express lanes for travel. So I thought this was a good addition to the services of Trinity Metro.
I'm even curious, why was this in the Dallas Morning News when this is about Fort Worth and Alliance? Like, I did not see there could have been. I just didn't see it in the other local publications. But this is, I mean, we were talking about this not too long ago when we were talking about sprawl and we were talking about the toll lanes and getting public transportation. So it feels like a good step.
Yeah, I think it will be. I think that it's a good use of those toll lanes for sure. And these are going to be 8 zero-emission electric buses that were purchased in 2022. And the project has several aims to improve the rider's experience. There'll be there's new bus shelters and benches and signage going in all around Fort Worth. And Trinity Metro is working on this whole project. But that is interesting. I hadn't even thought about the fact that this was in a Dallas paper.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the next articles by Sandra Sadek, which is in the Fort Worth report, Trinity Metro to eliminate the dash low-performing routes?
Yeah, this is not such a happy story for me, especially since I was really involved in all of the work that brought about the dash. But it's the only electric bus route currently on the system, and they are considering eliminating the service. So the headline says eliminating the dash, but the first paragraph says they're considering eliminating the service. They've cited low ridership over the past few years. I think it hasn't really rebounded since COVID. This was a partnership with Trinity Metro and the Cultural District and West 7th Corridor. All the major museums in the Cultural District were actually invested in and funded this for 3 years. The city of Fort Worth also helped fund it. And all of that was done on the understanding that going forward, we would find other ways that wouldn't necessarily continue to need to be funded that way. I have used this route to get to places. I used it when I went to the rodeo and rode in the Grand Entry. And I know people who live along this corridor who utilize it to go downtown. I think that they've struggled with marketing that it's available. And they do point out, and I have pointed this out as a positive, the fact that the number 2 bus route on that corridor and the dash overlap for a significant portion of it. And so in that portion that they overlap, there's literally a bus that comes by every 7.5 minutes, which makes it the highest served transit corridor in the entire city. I think their point being that you don't need both, maybe, and they're not getting rid of these electric buses. I think they're looking at possibly moving them to other routes, maybe the downtown Molly, the trolley route. I don't think that it's terrible to always look at what routes have low ridership, and maybe some of these routes can be served in other ways, like Zip Zone, which is mentioned in this article, and that these buses can be used elsewhere where ridership is higher. But having been very involved in bringing the dash about, it makes me a little sad. And I would love to see circulators to all of the kind of major cultural hubs around the city so that people have the ability to get to them without getting in their car. Just recently, somebody wrote on one of the local kind of tourist web pages in Fort Worth about, hey, I'm taking Amtrak from Oklahoma City to downtown Fort Worth, and what things should I see and where should I go? And how can I get there after getting off of the Amtrak train without having a car. And there literally are ways to get to all of the major visitor kind of cultural centers. And you still would be able to without the dash. But my hope is that we can kind of grow these things and not be eliminating because of low ridership.
Well, it looks like we give you the electric transit to Alliance, but it's now also seems like we are getting challenged with the dash, which provides local transportation in the inner loop. All right, well, we're going to move into the big story. Our big story is with Lee Henderson. He is running for Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors, Place 3. He's going to discuss what that is, what's this new position look like, and why it's important for us to have a Fort Worth representative in that space. Because if it's not him, it could be a O'Hare endorsed candidate. So he grew up in Ridgemar neighborhood. His father was a longtime neighborhood association president and a physicist at Lockheed Martin. His mother was a retired Fort Worth ISD teacher. He currently has 2 daughters going to college here in Fort Worth. He was also voted and trusted by the Fort Worth mayor and the council to serve as city plan commissioner. We share that in common together. He was also a founding member of both Steer Fort Worth and Steer Fort Worth Legacy. And he is also the director of volunteering for Fort Worth Food and Wine Festival. Lee is one of the smartest people I know, someone who really got a good understanding, also simply because of his work as a public policy and advocacy strategist. He just comes at it from a lens and detail that I always think it's interesting. So we're excited to have Lee on the show.
So I'm a Democrat, obviously. This is a nonpartisan position I'm running for. But should I be elected? It's been 34 years since a Democrat was elected countywide in Tarrant County, Texas. Now, I have a lot of Republican friends and Republican endorsers, Democratic endorsers. But it's kind of interesting to think about that could be happening in a very low turnout election because it is nonpartisan on the ballot. And it's more about the person on that ballot rather than the party, which is typically what drives our election results. So, I'm here from Fort Worth. I grew up here. I went to All Saints Episcopal School. I then went to Monning Middle School and Arlington Heights High School. I think it's kind of interesting and why I went to public school instead of private school like my brothers did. So my mom was a full-time substitute teacher. She took off for a number of years while she was raising her sons. But then she went back as full-time substitute teacher. She was part-time, then full-time. But you don't earn retirement, Texas Teachers Retirement Service, TRS, if you're not an actual teacher on contract. If you're a full-time substitute, you don't earn towards that retirement. So she tried for several years to get back as a full-time teacher and was not able to. They denied her. And I'm not sure I like the term, but what she was told specifically is you were blackballed because your son is in private school. And we do not hire Fort Worth ISD teachers who have their kids in private school. And so I was going to go to Trinity Valley. They told me I was going to go to Trinity Valley, and all of a sudden I was going to go to Monning instead for middle school. And then my mom got her teacher contract.
It's not that hard to be a teacher these days in Fort Worth ISD. They don't have that blackballing potential.
I think they're trying to hire right now.
Yeah, and this is a number of years ago. I mean, this is when I was going to 6th grade.
Yeah.
Right.
So something I didn't say in your bio, when I asked you what you did for a living, you said public policy and advocacy strategist.
Right.
What is that? And
sure.
How do you blend in being from Fort Worth with that work you do? It's also not just Fort Worth, it's Austin. And so there's a state play there. Can you just tell us more about your experience and roles?
It's not just Austin, it's Washington, D.C.
Oh, great.
Okay, so I work in a national organization. Not naming them here. I don't have permission to do that here on the podcast. We're in a pretty good comm shop, though. Pretty professional. So, I mean, what that job means is actually managing people and vendors to do the work that we do. So the organization I work for is about 400 people on staff, based in New York, with a big office in Washington, D.C. I get to live here in Fort Worth and do the job remotely. I'm going up to D.C. next week to represent our organization, America Votes.
Like, what is public policy and advocacy strategy?
Public policy, we know that's what the laws are, right? What should the laws do for the people they serve? That's public policy.
Awesome.
Yeah. Advocacy. Advocacy organizations advocate for the public policy. They also advocate for cultural change. They advocate to have the stories and narratives in narrative television and movies properly told for their issues. They might litigate. They might do social science research, like academic type research, publish studies. Of course, we do. They have what we call a full comms shop that works with the press and works with its principals to go on air and do interviews and book those times.
Getting back to your Fort Worth story, because you talked about how you got through until about 6th grade, and clearly you went on to some higher education that brought you to the roles that you play now and the work that you're doing now. So continuing with your Fort Worth story, where did you go to school? What brought you to the work that you do now?
I'll tell you where I wanted to go to school was MIT. And I didn't go there because my dad convinced me that I should go where it's free and don't have any student debt.
Yeah, I was not
afterwards.
successful convincing my kids of that. They decided to go places where we paid out-of-state tuition.
Really?
But yeah.
So your kids felt they had a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
Interesting, because I just did what my parents told me we were going to do about that. And I went to college at UT Dallas, University of Texas at Dallas in Richardson, which is not in Dallas. It's not even in Dallas County, but it's called University of Texas at Dallas.
Well, it's kind of like the Dallas Cowboys, anyways. It's a lot of
And
things.
then with the World Cup coming here, they're saying it's in Arlington, but they're putting Dallas on there as well.
Well,
That's what
sure.
people recognize around the world.
But yeah, so I went there for my bachelor's in computer science. Yeah. And I actually went and lived in Houston for about 3.5 years doing that kind of work for what we call a new media firm. I don't think anybody calls it that anymore. Basically, it would be a digital firm now. Yeah. That's what we call it. Then I came back up to Fort Worth, moved back up here, and went to work with my brother at a company he had started. He told me he needed my help, so I came and was his CFO. Not immediately. We didn't call it that first. We called it when we needed to start doing bank loans.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I ran all the operations side, the finance side, the accounting. Hired a controller. They hired accounts payable people. I then ended up having information technology as well, and had an IT director, and he had a guy that helped him, and
built a business. It sounds like.
CFO, managed the cash, payables, receivables.
And it seems like at your current role, you manage people and vendors. So it seems like you're, and then you seem like you're very detail oriented. Your computer science degree. Yeah. You're also,
but I want to say as a strategist, I say I just manage people and vendors, but I manage people who do the kind of work like looking hard into the data of what's going on, both in the issue we work in, but also like if we're going to spend money on electoral politics, what we call independent expenditure, then it's about how we budget that and spend it correctly to get the best bang for the buck out of it. What message testing, creative testing. We usually use vendors to do those things. We don't produce in-house. We also have a very large volunteer network, so there's analysis of how best to use the volunteers to meet the mission, and how to train them into roles that they sign up for. It's interesting for me. I'm going to add one more thing. So before I took this job, I was also up for another job 8 years ago with another national advocacy organization for a Texas-based position. And they didn't hire me. It was down to the last two. They ended up firing the person 3 months later they hired instead of me.
Whoops.
You're now running for Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors Place 3. What is that position, and why are you doing that?
So this is a brand new elected office in Texas. So let me introduce the position first, right? The Texas State Legislature, in its infinite wisdom, last session in 2023, this special session number 2, they had 3 special sessions.
Which is where they tend to get into trouble.
They get in trouble all year long. All year long they get in trouble. They only meet every 2 years unless the governor wants to get really cute with it and keep calling them a special session, even in the odd, even number of years. He has the authority to do that. They have the authority to gavel it done after they convene and say, no, we're not going to do anything, which you said we're going to do, which actually did happen in one of the special sessions in the House past year.
It's been a little wild.
Yeah. So Ann, of course, does public policy down at the Capitol.
I try. It takes years and years and years to get anything done down
Are-
there.
would we call you a
you guys know each other.
Would you call you a lobbyist, Dan?
Am I a lobbyist?
Are you a lobbyist?
No.
You don't register as a lobbyist?
No.
Are you
Because
sure you
we
shouldn't
stay.
have to?
I'm absolutely positive.
You know what's crazy is I've known these two for a couple of years now, and I still don't know what they do. So if you're listening, wondering what these two do, welcome to the party.
We probably do too much. That's the problem. We say yes to a lot of things. We support a lot of things.
I say no to a whole lot of stuff.
I have yet to find that that response.
The board position, right? Like, what are we doing? Brand new elected office. Every county with more than 75,000 people population now has to hold these director elections. They have the central appraisal districts is the term under the law. So they're like, maybe it's called the Denton Central. I don't even know what Denton's called. Tarrant Appraisal District. So Dallas has one. Denton has one. All of them have to elect 3 more directors than they currently have.
How many do they currently have, and is that based on population?
So I'll just say Tarrant has 5, and that's what's required under the law for our parameters. That's as complicated. Ann, of course, knows how this works because she was a city council member. She can probably describe it better than I can if she wants to take a moment.
I'll add in if I think of anything.
Okay. So the taxing units under the law, that's like your school district, your city, the hospital district, water district. They get to vote on who the appointed members are of the Tarrant Appraisal District. We say appointed, but when actually they have an election that the tax units have a certain power of based on a couple of factors. But basically the schools are the big daddies because they have the most tax revenue off of what they appraise at the appraisal district. Then you also have the tax assessor who automatically sits on the board by state law. So there's 4 elected members. The tax assessor is the 5th.
Elected amongst the taxing entities.
Right, elected by the taxing unit entities.
So in the last legislative session, they decided to add 3 at-large
countywide, nonpartisan positions.
Right.
Now, they're doing 3 at once because they decided that that's the way they're going to start it, but they'll then draw straws, basically, and who gets what tenure before the next election. So it becomes a staggered election after the first.
Unlike city council in Fort Worth, where everybody's up at the same time.
I mean, y'all could change city. I'm sorry, you don't do
I know
that
they
anymore.
talk about. No, it's not me anymore, but they do talk about that periodically.
Some cities can change the city charter. Fort Worth could if the voters wanted to approve it.
They reviewed that in 2016 and the panel decided not to
we could
suggest
stagger
that.
It. Most cities stagger it and don't do it all at once.
So back to the adding the 3. One thing that you and I have talked about with that is, what does 5 plus 3 equal?
8.
Which is a
4-4
even
split.
number. So they could split on votes and not have any way to break a tie.
I have no idea what they do with that.
I think that's back to that infinite knowledge comment that you made about the
state
legislature.
legislature's a fun place, isn't it?
Unintended consequences that they might have to circle back and address at some point.
Which would probably require another constitutional amendment because constitutional amendments are required to create elected office in Texas at that level.
And so why are you running for it?
I don't know. Back in late January, it's like, well, the state legislature did this. So who's running? Who's going to do it? Nobody was even thinking about it. I started talking to local elected officials and political government affairs type people. And I haven't thought about it. We're worried about the primaries, which are not the same election date. We do this. So I started trying to recruit a slate of candidates to run for place 1, 2, and 3 that were former elected officials. Not me. Did not want to run for this office in the first place. That was not the plan. A lot of people considered it. Eventually, nobody said yes but me because an elected official, I'm not sure I want to use her name, said, no, Lee, I need you to run. And I said, okay, we're on filing deadline February 16th, and I'm still trying to recruit
somebody else to do it.
No, well, somebody who's been in elected office and is trusted by the voters already and the taxpayers. But yeah, February 16th, 4:45 p.m. filing deadline on Friday. Had to go file my paperwork at Judge Tim O'Hare's office. I called ahead to make sure they were going to be there for me.
At what time?
Paperwork was filled out a day ahead of time.
And you also are talking about how this is important that Fort Worth has representation on this 8-seat board. What does the landscape look like today and the other people running in this space? You also mentioned Tim O'Hare, and Tim O'Hare potentially having his own slate in mind of what he would want this to look like. So to our listeners, tell them why this is important to have on their radar and to know that you exist in this space.
Let's set the table here. Our county executive, elected countywide, is Tim O'Hare. And it appears Tim O'Hare wants to have more and more power and control over different parts of our local government. He wants his people in place, his lieutenants, if you will, in place all over the place, to get, maybe build a bench. So when there's another office that comes up, those people can then run for that. And so the Tarrant Appraisal District is county-wide. That means everybody in Tarrant County can vote May 4th, early voting April 22nd through 30th. So Tim O'Hare recruited a slate. 3 people, place 1, 2, and 3. He officially announced his endorsement slate on social media this past week. People were like, well, which ones are on place 1, 2? Which ones are they? Well, they told me when I asked them if they were running as a slate when we did the ballot order drawing. I just asked. They said, yeah. But now it's official out in social media who those folks are that are running in place 1, 2, and 3. Their campaign looks like it's going to be paid for by Tim O'Hare's campaign accounts. He has a PAC, Political Action Committee.
And so that's interesting to me that you guys would know the rules on this, but someone who's elected official for Tarrant County can use their funds to bring more people in a thing that's supposed to be a democracy where you elect people freely.
Right. I mean, they can use their money. Free speech is money in politics. So he's going to use his money he's collected from donors to expand his political power. But we're going to not let him do that. He's not going to win. I'm going to win.
And that's what I was wondering. What's the strategy to winning? And May 4th election is not the primary, the runoff election. So that was important for the listeners to know. But how do you see this May 4th election panning out? Because there's other things on that ticket as well.
Well, let's be clear. So there is a partisan party runoff May 28th. Not May 4th is right between the primary and the primary runoff.
Which can be confusing, which is why we're trying to reiterate over and over and over again that there's multiple times to vote and everyone should vote at all of them.
Vote every single time you can. There's 4 elections. We got the primary runoff, the general municipal, and the general municipal runoff, if necessary. That's asking people to go to the polls 4 times. In the infinite wisdom of the Texas State Legislature, apparently this makes sense. I think it's sort of a voter suppression. Get fewer people voting because they're exhausted. We call it voter exhaustion. Then fewer people participate, and it's easier to bring a message to the few people that you do know participate time and time again. It's in the public record, the voter history on people. It's part of how we, in my job, what we do call voter targeting, build a universe of who is likely to vote in an election. In this election, I don't want to say the number. I'm going to use an approximate number because I don't want them to know what I think. It'll be fewer than 150,000 people in a county that will probably participate in this election. More than 100,000. That's a very small percentage of the registered voters in Tarrant County. We're going to see under 10% voter turnout.
Which will be bigger or smaller than the runoff primaries?
Primary runoffs, we'll probably see 27, 28%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, I mean, amongst adding up both parties together.
Because I was also like you said, there's other things for like school boards and we have the convention center, hotel occupancy tax. So I didn't know if there was going to be other things that maybe corral your May 4th election to have more than the runoff.
Yeah, I would encourage the listeners to go and get a sample ballot of what is on their ballot for where they live in their political jurisdictions. So school board trustees, city council, mayor, those are on a lot of folks' ballot in Tarrant County. In Fort Worth, it's going to be the Tarrant Appraisal District, and it's going to be the ballot measure for the 4th Convention Center project. They're raising the hotel occupancy tax to 17% for visitors that come to Fort Worth and stay in hotels. That funds several things, mostly our convention visitors bureau that's called Visit Fort Worth. Visit Fort Worth is distributes that money all around for many things in Fort Worth that promote tourism and things to do. For example, I'm wearing a T-shirt right now. Visit Fort Worth is a huge sponsor of the Fort Worth Food and Wine Festival every year. They sponsor a lot of stuff that's like tourist-related stuff, because we have a lot of people that come to Fort Worth and travel.
It's typically known as the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
CVBs.
A lot of people have changed it to Visit Fort Worth or Visit whatever
Dallas
city it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But that tax is on the ballot, and there'll be a large paid effort to turn out the vote for that effort in Fort Worth. So as part of that mix of who's likely to vote, it benefits me being, hey, I'm associated with Fort Worth. Yeah. I serve as an officer of the city in Fort Worth as my role on Plan Commission, as do you. And so hopefully there'll be more Fort Worth voters as a share than where the other folks on the ballot reside or know well, which is in Colleyville, Haltom City, and the Carroll ISD.
No, that makes sense. Well, excited that's in your favor.
Yeah, it's interesting timing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty lucky they passed that about 1.5 weeks before the filing deadline. I may not have actually filed if they hadn't done that. A little scarier election to compete in.
So what exactly do the Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors do?
So they hire and fire the chief appraiser. Now, recently, that had been controversial because they end up firing the chief appraiser, or he resigned, or whatever they did. Usually this position, they meet for about 2 hours a month. Well, they met a lot last year in the fall. A lot of time, a lot of executive session.
There's a lot of news coverage.
A lot of news.
They're back in the news.
They are back in the news. But let me finish saying what they do. So they approve the budget, they approve contracts, and they also have the biennial reappraisal plan. That's a complicated one about dictating the policy, passing the policy of how the chief appraiser's office will appraise the properties, the values of them. So you have a different thing that is not this board, that is the appraisal review board. They use that word board twice for the entity. And those are folks that people that want to come and protest their taxes are heard by. We do not hear protests. We do not set appraisals ourselves. We set the policy to do so. Approving contracts is important. Tarrant Appraisal District does not follow best practices. They don't. Currently, they do not follow best practices. Yeah.
So one of the reasons that you want to run is so that you can improve that, I would guess.
Well, yes, they need to follow the best practices. There's private firms out there that contract with a whole lot of the other appraisal districts to provide just better services. Some are law firms that do the work, and they have not chosen to do that. And I think another interesting element here is, like I said, the tax assessor is on the board, and Wendy Burgess just lost her primary for re-election to a Tim O'Hare loyalist, Rick Barnes, who is the former GOP chair, Tarrant County.
And so does that mean they will get to elect that tax appraiser?
Well, assuming
position?
that the Republican nominee, Rick Barnes, wins the general in November in Tarrant County, yeah, it would be him on the board.
Gotcha.
So that was the primary. There was a change in the primary. The current tax
assessor, the incumbent tax assessor, lost the primary, so she will be out of office in January 2025, whatever the outcome of the general election in November is. Yeah, it's interesting, the partisan primary voters and who they are and the choices they make versus the general electorate. So primaries have actually declined in participation historically now, as the Republican Party has changed. And you have People like Mayor Matty Parker said publicly in an interview, I can't see how I could run in a Republican primary with the party as it is now. So you have, I guess, the moderates in the Republican Party they refer to sometimes. And there's some more colorful terms that are used.
I call them reasonable. Or
Reasonable's
more reasonable.
Good. Well, if they're on an attack path, they're going to say that they're the mail we got this spring for the primary is ridiculous. Like everybody was a liberal who was running in the Republican Party, depending on who was sending the piece of mail. I didn't know there were so many liberal Democrats that were funded by George Soros and
in the Republican Party.
In the Republican Party, like okay,
it did seem that way.
I mean,
yes.
I saw the attack mail from on Charlie Guerin, who has endorsed me for this seat, which I thank Charlie for that. I really appreciate it. It means something special to me that he was say yes, absolutely. But yeah, that's it turns voters off. They don't want it. They don't want that. I'm not going to participate in that. And I don't know who. Everybody's lying apparently on both sides of that primary. And you saw that all over the county. It was just trash being thrown.
But it doesn't seem like to impact the Republicans. They still win, even if they have a low primary turnout.
Well, not always. Yeah. So we had 2 cycles in a row. When I say cycle, that's like the election year cycle, right? So in Joe Biden won Tarrant County for president. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump for president in Tarrant County. And Beto O'Rourke beat, was it Ted Cruz? No, he did not. I don't think he won when he was running again for governor in Tarrant County. I forget the numbers now.
Prior to that.
2022. Yeah. I don't remember what happened in 2022 on that. Yeah. It was close. Yeah. But it was also interesting is why would, in 2018 versus 2022, there be a difference in the partisan result, right? But it's about the people. There's enough people in the voters that vote for the person and not the party here in Tarrant County for that to make a difference. So Greg Abbott was more popular.
I guess, Ann, why do you think it's important that people know about Lee and that we have a Fort Worth representative in this TAD board?
I mean, I think the one thing that people complain the most about are taxes. And property taxes are high up on everybody's list. But I feel like most people don't have any idea how these decisions are made. And so constantly, as a city council representative, you would hear people complaining that the city was doing this and the city was doing that. And as we pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, there's a whole lot of different taxing entities that all tax, and that all added together is your full tax bill.
By far largest is your school district that you reside in.
Yeah.
That's
I
the
don't have
bulk
a
of
problem
your
paying taxes
values.
for public schools. I support public schools, and I think that, we should be putting money into our public schools. That's another topic that we've talked about here on a couple of occasions. But I think that it's important that people understand, and it's hard to understand. I mean, just in your description of this board and that board and what their purview is, I can see people like their eyes rolling back in their head and just feeling like they don't understand it, and therefore they don't want to say anything about it. But I think the important thing is having Fort Worth represented on this board. There's been several races recently where folks from other places have tried to influence city council races with folks from outside of Fort Worth, and I think that is terrible. And so in this case, I personally, when I was in elected office, didn't run around spending money that people had given me to run for office on other people's campaigns. I felt like money that was given to me to run that race and support me in my efforts to represent the people in the district that I was running for. And I didn't check with all those people and say, well, do you also support this other person? So I have a problem with elected officials that write checks out of their campaign accounts. And I know a lot of them do it. It's not illegal. They can do it. But I just think that that's a weird influence and using other people's money, basically, on something that you haven't checked with them about. So to your point about the county judge using his campaign funds and his PAC.
Well, that's what it looks like he's going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't seen any campaign finance reports yet.
We won't see those until the 30-day report before the election, which is not that far off.
Yeah. So you can look those things up afterwards. But again, just for me, I think that's a wrong thing to do. And I think it's influencing, trying to line up people that already agree with him and that sort of thing. And I would rather have educated, informed people who want to look at policy like you're recommending and suggesting and have done in various roles that you've taken on. So,
yeah. And you also mentioned that there could be other PACs or like Patriot Mobile or other people who could potentially get involved in your race.
And we don't know who all is going to come in on any side of it. Like, is there going to be a PAC that's supporting me that I don't have control over their message? Certainly possible. Probably very likely at this point. Mm-hmm. Then you'll have whatever Tim O'Hara wants to have, and Patriot Mobile might be, he has a pretty close relationship with their spending.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that their message would be very similar to what his message is.
Yeah.
And his candidate's slate message is.
Is it common for PACs to just go and do like a mailing without even checking with a candidate, especially like if they're in favor of that candidate? Because
yes.
I always tried really
laws.
hard to make sure that people ran stuff by me. I didn't, even if somebody wanted to support me.
Okay, let's be careful, Ann. There are laws about independent expenditure and coordination. Yeah, so they're not supposed to coordinate their message, but they can look at your website and see what you're saying and say something similar.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not talking about directing them, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. This is part of my professional thing I do.
I just, the idea of somebody directing a message that has to do with me that may not be totally accurate.
Yeah, happens a lot.
That is troubling to me.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but that's why you cannot make your decisions based on what comes in your mailbox. I really think people need to do their research.
And this is the great American experiment ongoing, what we're doing and how politics and democracy works and who gets the microphone and how much they pay for it.
Yeah, that's all very frustrating.
I think it's fantastic, and I love it. I mean, I love that it exists, and I don't like the big money coming in like it does, but we don't have a public finance system for elections.
Yeah, my mother, when she wanted to know how much she should be contributing to my campaign, asked what the cap was, and when I told her there wasn't one, she was quite disturbed by that.
Right. No, there's no cap in my race.
I think she thought she would just give like the maximum amount and be a hero, but she knew there wasn't one, and she was like, "Oh, what am I going to do now?"
I think this is a fascinating part of who can afford to run for office. First of all, once you're elected, most of these offices don't pay a thing for your time. City council and mayor in Fort Worth, they tried to raise how much it was.
Twice. They've tried twice.
They tried a couple times, yes. Not really very successful in doing that. The voters rejected that, even though they expanded the council to 11 voting members in that same election year, and they denied the increase in salary.
I know. Several of my colleagues were running around town discouraging it.
I mean, I didn't know that.
Yeah. The first time in 2016 when we changed the charter and added the 2 council districts.
But I want to note that Mayor Parker has a job now with Cook's Children's.
I think more people on council have jobs outside of their elected position now than ever before.
Michael Crane's in the commercial real estate business.
Jared Williams at the food bank. Jeanette at the county.
Yeah.
Elizabeth is an attorney.
Yeah. Macy Hill is an advisor to a firm, financial advisor firm. I should go through all of them. They all have jobs.
Yep.
And that's unusual for a city of our size. Very unusual, because most of these folks that are elected, say in Houston or Dallas, that's their full-time job they do to serve the people. There's so much stuff that comes through they have to make a decision on. And we didn't even have more than one district aide in Fort Worth on staff for a long time for each council member.
I am aware.
Oh, Ann, I bet you are.
I look now and I'm like, oh, the things we could have done with 2 staff members.
Now,
but there are some cities that have way more than that.
A lot more. Yeah, if you go to Austin, they got a full staff for you.
Yep.
And that's a smaller city.
What else do you think about Fort Worth? Like, what are, like, in the sense of how the politics are operating, how it's changed since you've been here? You've been here for a while. Mm-hmm. You've seen it change.
I'd like to actually refer back to the Steer Fort Worth founding in 2011.
Okay.
So that was the year that Betsy Price was elected mayor. She was a former tax assessor. Let's go ahead and
full circle this.
Yeah. And she ran for mayor. I think she was an incumbent in that position when she ran. Maybe she had to resign to run. I'm not really sure now. But yeah, so I ran for council that year in 2011. There was an open seat. Carter Burdett said I should run. He was the councilman. Now, he wasn't endorsing me. He was my neighbor. He's like, yeah, Lee, you should definitely run. I'm not running it again. He wasn't picking a favorite, so to speak, at the time. It was a big, wide field of like 7 people running. And so I came in, I think I came in third. It's a good place to come in and council when there's a runoff because you don't have to do the runoff. But you did pretty good. People remember that. Dennis Shingleton was then elected. He won that, and he served for 10 years. But Betsy Price was also running for mayor. That was an open seat. Mike Moncrief decided he wasn't going to run again for mayor. And Betsy and Jim had a runoff. Jim Lane. Went to a runoff. And so I was asked by, I'm going to get the name of the entity wrong because sometimes it changes. Basically, the Fort Worth Arts Council. Is that the name of the entity back then in 2011?
I think so. They've changed their name.
So there was the lady there, Kathleen East Brown, was organizing. She used to think it was VP of Development or something like that at the time.
And then she was interim.
Well, at the time,
before,
at 2011,
yeah.
Yes. She asked me to come help organize a debate between and for the runoff candidates. So that would be Jim Lane and Betsy Price, and I believe it was also John Perry and Dennis Shingleton also participating in that debate. I think they kind of just did all at the same time because it was District 7, the West Side Cultural District. So I organized and got a whole bunch of our local organizations as like co-sponsors. This is the official big debate we're going to have. I think Paul Harrell was our moderator. Mm-hmm. Did you go to that?
No, I didn't.
Is it Scott Theater?
Was it
in that building?
A real debate or was it a panel discussion?
Oh, no.
There was a debate.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I'd been there.
I wrote the format, and Paul, of course, added some of his own questions, but
yeah.
I provided a lot of what we were going to do. This is so Betsy Price came up to me after it was over and thanked me for helping organize it and said, Lee, it's people like you. I want to make sure that you stay engaged. I need more of people like you, your age, engaged civically. Said, when I get elected, it's like she made a campaign promise to me to get my vote. I was like, well, I don't know, man. I'm gonna start an organization that is sponsored by the city to promote civic engagement, get people involved, and study public policy, make recommendations, and that became Steer Fort Worth. And I tell the story at our Steer Fort Worth Legacy launch, which we had at the place in the Frostbank Tower on the balcony. What's it called? Downtown.
Bird and Branch.
That's the one, yeah. And so Betsy Price, of course, is our honored guest because she founded Steer Fort Worth when it really comes down to it. That was her.
It's funny. The first time Steer Fort Worth did anything in my neighborhood was Bluebonnet Circle. Mm-hmm. And I had some neighbors that were standoffish about it because they were telling everybody, oh, this is Mayor Price's baby. This is what she's doing. And I hadn't even heard that. I just knew of it as a young leaders organization. And so I was arguing with some of my neighbors about whether or not, well, first of all, I didn't think even if it had been Mayor Price's idea that was something to be afraid of, that we shouldn't be collaborating and cooperating because they were doing good work. They were doing urban design stuff. So I was all for it. 2014, 2014, right before I ran for office.
Excellent. I've met a lot of friends from Steer Fort Worth.
Yeah.
I think one of our most prominent citizens was also OG Steer Fort Worth member. That's Sasha Bass, Ed Bass's wife.
She was part of Steer Fort Worth.
She was part of Steer Fort Worth, very beginning.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't involved in the stuff I was doing on with my neighborhood on Bluebonnet Circle.
I don't remember which policy committee she was on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And for those of you who are listening, you can also look at joining Steer Fort
Worth. You can.
Worth.
Yeah, it's only $50 a year. We have a program called Key Holders, which is similar. I may make somebody mad by saying this, but similar to what Leadership Fort Worth does, similar to what Leadership ISD does to
educate and
introduce
inform.
and educate.
Yeah, sorry.
People to what's going on in Fort Worth and all these different areas like nonprofits, city elected service, the different legal jurisdictions that have the authority to make your policy, what the law is.
Food Wine Festival. Can you tell us about what's coming up and what people can expect from that?
So this is the 10th anniversary of the Fort Worth Food and Wine Festival. We hold it every spring. It is first weekend of April, whenever that falls. We hold it right now at Clear Fork Outdoors on that old Edwards Ranch land that Casco operates now, right next to the Clear Fork development on Clear Fork, Maine. So April 4th through 7th this year. Events, you can buy your tickets online. They're going to sell it very quickly. They're almost all sold out.
Awesome.
Lee has a lot of experience across Fort Worth and Tarrant County. He has involved himself civically in many areas and aspects of life in Fort Worth and has a reason to want to be in this role to further those things and serve all of the people. So the whole thing that you and I, EJ, talk a lot about with the fact that when people get into these roles, that some of them, dig in their heels and say, I'm only here for this person or that person or this side or that side. I think this is an example of someone who has served this city and this county well because he has a heart for this city and this county and is looking to ensure that things go well for the greater community going forward.
The city, the state, this country, all of it.
As a city plan commissioner, I can also attest that he's way better at that than I am.
Oh,
Did he do his homework?
He super asks the right
Understands
questions.
everything.
He finds the errors in the policies. And I think as from a politician, thinking about the process, a lot of times you think you want the person who's woo and up and on the stage, but you actually want someone who is able to see and look at details like Ann did so well, like you do in the things you're a part of. So I'm also a big fan of the work you do.
All right, so to wrap up our episode, we always end with wins and losses, but we try to do the losses first so that we can end on a win. And so my loss for today is the Tarrant Appraisal District says it is a victim of ransomware attacks following a website crash. And as someone who uses the Tarrant Appraisal District on the regular, it's always upsetting when it's not available. I'm looking at properties constantly to see what the status of them are and who owns them in case, something better could be happening. I think I'm going to have to get on allergy medication. So I'm a regular user of the TAD Appraisal District website, and I think I tried to get on it when this was happening. But this is just a loss to me because I think that there's people going around trying to attack websites and install ransomware on them just in sport. And I think it's always disturbing and makes you feel like you can't use the internet, the interwebs, without risking your personal information being, stolen or used in some unfortunate way.
Yeah, you've seen this done by school districts, state departments. Yeah, so, but now it's also, TAD has just gone through so much in the sense of turnover and leadership and just the nuances. It also doesn't need another thing kind of in a way as well.
I mean, our council member, Alan Blaylock, is a newcomer to this board, and he does have some expertise. He does have an extensive background in computer science and says that he's hoping to bring some insight that may be able to raise crucial questions in the meeting so that this doesn't happen in the future. So hopefully this loss turns into less of a loss.
Yeah. My loss is something you brought up in the first story, but that is the Tarrant County paid $37,500 to recruit new detention officers. So let me say that again. Our tax dollars went to spending $37,000 plus to recruiters to get people to become detention officers because we are unable to get people to apply, qualify, and actually then retain them to be officers in our Tarrant County jail. And so here's this. Not only did we spend $37,000+, they only got 3 people hired. So we have known that there's been a staffing problem.
There's 200 positions remaining open right now, and everyone is being forced to work overtime, like 57 plus hours overtime.
And let's just talk about, again, this is a jail that's also dealing with a lot around jail deaths. We're dealing a lot around AC and, actual living conditions for people in this jail. And so to also then have this gap, And to be clear, we pride ourselves in funding our prison system, our jail pipeline in Fort Worth. It's the thing that gets the most money. And these are the kind of crises. If this was happening in a school, you could tell that they'd be screaming vouchers and all this stuff. And so because, this is ran systemically by our Republican leaders, there's no cry out to why such dysfunction. So it's just a loss overall on how we just need a new way on how we enforce and support cities and keeping them safe. Cool. So we're going to now move into wins. And what is your win?
Well, the win for me came out of a Texas Tribune article that talks about Texas libraries working to bridge the state's mental health services gap. Libraries are near and dear to my heart, and lately there's been quite a bit of talk about what libraries bring to folks in a positive manner, as a place that is open to everyone all of the time, regardless of your socioeconomic level. They are places that are trusted by all people of all demographics. And this article is talking about how they want to take advantage of that and put libraries in the driver's seat to work with them to create health initiatives. I think that our local library has tried to do this as well and have, be places for people and places where people can go to use computers and all these various things, not just a storage place for books. But this just felt like another heartwarming story about how libraries can be for good in our community. And it just made me feel good. Yeah. So I felt like it was a win.
I love it. Well, my win is about just feeling good. I engaged and bought a ticket for the Fort Worth African American Roots Festival. It happened Sunday, and so I did it, or Saturday. So you and I recorded the Kathleen Hicks interview. From there, I went to the event.
Which I wish you would have reminded me of, because I would have gone too.
and so my wife was the one saying we should go. We get there. It was $50 a ticket. And I remember being like, one, I'm Brandy and the Decolonizing the Music Room have donated and support way over $50 to them and to support the work they do. So it wasn't, to me, I was just shocked that, wow, I wasn't expecting something like this to happen. And I could imagine what local people would feel like if they had to show up to something and pay $50. But once you get into the door, it was worth it, and it was incredible. Me and my wife had an amazing time. We probably haven't had that much fun together in a very long time, and so that was really cool. The quality of artists, and really, I just like the shout out is like, I just think Brandy is almost ahead of her time on the sense of what she sees for Fort Worth. I told her I wish we would have had you on the pod previously to talk more about the Fort Worth African American Roots Festival. It was incredible. And I mean, now I'm buying vinyls for blues and Delta blues and looking at Mississippi John and all the different things that I learned. It was just an incredible experience, and I was so thankful that I got to be a part of it. And just hopefully she continues to do it, and that people can see what she's really pulling off.
Yeah, I think people need to support that effort. I went last year, and I definitely would have been there this year. I lose track of things sometimes and don't make it to all the things that I want to make it to. But that reminder reminds me that I will go make a donation, because I don't want her to be discouraged and lose her, passion for this project, because it is something that Fort Worth really, really needs.
Yeah. Awesome. And, shout out to a lot of you who also said Fort Worth really needs this 817 podcast and that it actually matters. So we'll continue to show up for you guys every week to share the news and what's going on in Fort Worth. Check out Lee Henderson's work and his campaign website. And we look forward to seeing you at the polls May 4th and May 28th. Yeah.
Swipe, dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap.